Welcome to Sex, Love and Science with Laurie Muratori, clinical psychosexual therapist and relationship expert. This podcast explores sexuality, relationships, and the many facets in between, aiming to normalize sexual conversations, issues that we all face. Let's take the taboo out of sexuality and open up the conversations for a better sexual existence. I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we are meeting today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. All right, today's episode, I have Dr. Stuart Naughten, not Dr. Naughty here. Stuart is a relationship therapist, and he's writing a book that I think really a lot of people are going to want to read, because it's deconstructing the work that we do, but kind of simplifying it. Is that a kind of good synopsis?
I hope so. I hope that's what it achieves.
Well, it sounds like it is. Actually, how long have you been practicing?
I think I've been doing relationship counselling maybe 15 years.
That's okay.
Possibly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ever since one of my internships was Relationships Australia. That was my third and final one, and that got me kickstarted into it.
Okay.
And I've been doing it ever since.
And how much of your work is couples versus individuals, would you say?
I reckon I try to make it about 50-50.
Yeah,
50%
okay.
couples, 50% individuals, but it probably works out to be about 40%.
Yep.
Yeah. But I like doing both, basically.
Yeah.
So I try to do both.
So what inspired you to start writing about
I think it was
work?
With this topic, it was sometimes people come into relationship counselling and they're confused or concerned about what's going on in their relationship, and it's not immediately obvious to them. I mean, sometimes there are really overt, obvious reasons why something's wrong. There's abuse or a big trust betrayal or some big cataclysmic event has occurred, and you can point to it and it's kind of obvious.
Yep.
But often couples are coming in and they're just bewildered or confused about what's actually really going on, kind of internally between the two people. So it's kind of driven by an urge to kind of help people begin an analysis really of what might be like, quote unquote, really going on between the two people.
Yeah, okay. So it's two people who maybe recognize that they're not happy.
Yeah, something like that.
And they don't understand why.
Yeah, or whether it's they're having overt conflict or they're feeling distant or whatever, discontentment in the relationship, but not actually really understanding what the hell's going on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you find that you kind of not say the same thing over and over again, but, I guess for these people who don't understand why they're not happy, so it sounds like you've kind of realized that you keep, I guess, coming into the same conversations in the same framework to kind of enlighten them to figure it out.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think so we've all got to be pattern recognizers, and we've all got to try to, put some framework in place to try to understand what's going on. And the danger is, so if I try to impose my own framework on trying to understand a relationship, the danger then is like a confirmation bias where I might be
exactly.
See,
I'm right again.
Exactly. So I've got to be wary of that. But I'm going to put the model that I've come up with in sort of moderate terms, as in it's not too I don't assume that it will work for everyone, and I don't assume that there's a one-size-fits-all model, but that's what it's attempting to do. So it's an attempt to provide a very, very, very simple framework to kind of like begin an analysis of what's going on.
Yeah. Okay. Well, all right. I'm curious about the analysis now. All right. So you've talked about individual well-being management. This one strikes me probably the most because it has to recognize that, I guess, the sum of the parts, really, I guess that's kind of how I'm seeing it is, if somebody's not well, depressed or suffering, that the relationship will. Can you talk a little bit more about how to kind of how do people start talking about that without blaming each other?
It's a good question. It's a dilemma, isn't it?
Mm.
Yeah. So the logic behind it is, as you said, before you're in a relationship, you're an individual. So logically, the two components, we're talking about two people anyway, the two components, the sort of the health or wellness, so to speak, of those two, or stability of both of those two people or units will then determine the health of the union or health of the relationship. So what does health mean and how do you determine it?
Yeah.
What I have to do is, if I'm working with a couple, what I'll have to do is try to consider, if somebody's talking about some kind of version of being not okay, whether it's mood related or stress or a behavioral issue or something like that, I'll try and determine to what extent is that affecting the relationship, because the relationship is the client, so to speak, in the couples work, obviously.
Absolutely.
So I've got to try to think, okay, well, how might that idiosyncrasy or that problem or problematic behavior or condition be affecting the relationship, and try to keep the conversation directed towards that. And the complication as well is that wellness or, okayness is a matter of perception. It's subjective.
Exactly.
So,
and it's and not everybody's on the same page.
Yes. So you might have different standards of what okayness looks like or what.
So it's a minefield sometimes before you even start.
Absolutely.
Okay, that sounds pretty fun. Now, the next one that you talk about is fluctuating connectedness. This one, well, I guess I'm going to put my biased sex therapist hat on and think that's a pretty important one because I see people who feel like they should always be connected. Sexually, meaning, right? There needs to be a level of constant intimacy, and if there's not, then therefore the relationship is flawed. So getting people to accept that connectiveness fluctuates and that the relationship is still okay sounds like a pretty challenging task. How do you kind of break that down? Yeah,
so the basic concept of that element 2, is that connectedness or closeness is always fluctuating, isn't it? For various reasons, whether it's physical closeness, emotional closeness, even just physical proximity to one another. It's necessarily always fluctuating. So there are moments where the couple is very, very connected or close. And there are inevitable moments when you have to be separate. And you've got to be able to manage, we all have to be able to manage the transition between the two. So some people will do really well at connecting and they're good at it and they know how to, bids for connection or whatever. So they're good at the part where you're moving closer together, not so good at the part where you need to distance yourself or separate.
Well,
and for some it's the opposite.
Or some people who just want to be alone. And,
absolutely.
So how do you help people learn the art of not being connected and still secure?
Yeah, you're right. It's an art, isn't it? It's an art. I think I would start by introducing the concept of it to both skills, if you like, are important. And if I could get both people to recognize the two dangers, if you like. One danger is being too close and enmeshed or codependent or whatever, or smothered or whatever. Most people can understand what that feels like, might have experienced it. And the opposite risk is being too remote and disconnected. So if I can get both people to acknowledge that those two risks are possible, those are the kind of parameters. And then from there, I might be able to get both of them to agree that we need some kind of middle ground or some kind of tolerance of managing the fluctuation. And if I can get them on board with that, then it's just about trying to help them work through it.
Yeah, so it's like, how does a couple sit in the bell curve of that connectiveness? The challenge
was, I think, what you're alluding to. The challenge is different preferences or different needs or attachment styles. How do you manage that?
Well, that's a whole other topic, isn't it, really?
Yeah, it's I guess it's like there's a difficulty within that element. How do you manage different attachment styles or expectations?
Correct. Well, that's the thing I was going to comment on is the expectations because, I see a lot of that, it's just in the sex world is I want that high frequency, or I need all of these different ways of touch to know that you desire me and that we're connected. And so if none of that happens, therefore the person thinks that they're not connected and they're undesirable. So it just seems like it's trying to get people to really just sit in themselves as well and understand that. But that's really hard for a lot of people to do.
How do you, if somebody is feeling their preference is more closeness, sexual intimacy or closeness, how do you try to convince them that separation or distance is also valuable? Like, how do you do that?
Yeah, well, I guess we kind of look at autonomy to a degree.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of what you're talking about is here's the parameters, like this is what too much distance looks like. But also I think normalizing that one person can't be at your sexual beck and call 24/7.
Mm-hmm. So autonomy, the value of that, bring that in.
Yeah, to a degree. And then also then kind of taking the pressure off and looking at other ways. So things that are not sexual, or taking the pressure off of, genital or erotic touch, and how to enhance the other forms of connection, which then potentially might lead to, sexual connection.
That's interesting. So you bring up the other facets of intimacy or closeness.
Yeah. But like just thinking about doing that in the fluctuating connectiveness, that sounds so tricky, right? Is how can you kind of like, I don't know, cultivate that connection? I'm just thinking of even just like hugging or kissing, when you also have to be mindful that it will fluctuate.
Yeah. Well, I don't try to kind of reinvent the wheel in terms of the existing frameworks that are out there, like love languages concept, for example.
Well, yeah, that's been done to death, hasn't it?
Yeah, and I think it's sort of, some people find it a little bit corny, but maybe the language around it. But the thing I like about that is the concept is that there are different facets of intimacy, and there are individual differences, and we need to be practical, if you like, or to be adaptive. You've got to accept the fact that you have different types of desires for intimacy, and how can we as a couple make it work given our differences?
Yeah,
so I think that's what I like about concepts like that. So I might bring something like that in, acknowledging differences.
I really like that.
Maybe trying to celebrate them if you're lucky.
If you're lucky.
Yeah.
So I guess, part of then the fluctuating connectiveness is just being aware of differences.
Yeah.
And I guess you can choose to tolerate those differences or not at the end of the day.
Exactly, yeah.
If it's too different, then I guess there's a good chance the relationship's not suitable.
Exactly. So like if the part of the analysis or using a model like this, it's not necessarily designed to make people stay together.
Yeah.
It's more like an analytical tool. So you might run the analysis, so to speak, and it might actually help you determine that the relationship is not overall viable for you or good for you or healthy for you. So I try to be disinterested as to whether two people stay together or not.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really fair point, because I think there's this notion that, as couples or relationship therapists, that like it's our job to keep people together.
Yeah.
Or to save the relationship.
Do you find that as an expectation?
Yeah. Yeah, potentially. I mean, even if I just talk to the general public or talk about what you do, I think that's what people think you go to therapy for.
How to make it work. How to stay together.
But I like how you've kind of pointed out that this is kind of like a diagnostic tool to potentially say, here's a lot of reasons why we shouldn't be together.
Yeah, possibly.
And I think that's actually really pretty fair.
It could also be used to help you determine what sort of partner might suit you.
Oh, yeah. For a single person?
Yeah, absolutely. Or unpacking a previous relationship, trying to dissect it or, debrief about it. What the hell happened? What was unbalanced or whatever, or what caused the demise of it. It could be a tool for that as well.
Okay, so it could be a really good way for people who keep maybe picking the wrong partners and want to understand what is it about them in relationships, and potentially
definitely
change the script of the relationship.
Hopefully, absolutely, really important.
Wow. All right. Can you hurry up and finish this book?
Sure.
All right. The third part that you talk about is fairness management. I'm just flashing back to many couples, and that's just, sometimes the fairness part's pretty tricky. So can you kind of run me through a little bit about how you kind of are dissecting fairness management?
Yeah, I use the word fairness because it's quite a neutral. I try to use the most neutral terms.
Yep.
With the fewest connotations to put people off. So fairness is a fairly neutral word that most people can connect with, but other words might be justice, or power, the power balance in the relationship. Yeah. So in a sense, I'm talking. It's all the same thing in a way. The power balance, the fairness balance, the justice, status is another term. All to me anyway, describing the same thing in a sense.
Yep.
So the perception of the fairness in the relationship is critical. I mean, most of the time, couples come because of, I don't know about your experience, from my experience, usually the impetus to come to counselling is fighting, conflict.
Yeah. And
why are they fighting? Usually there's because one or both people perceives that it's unfair. The relationship is unfair overall. So if I ask a couple the very, very general question, so is this a fair relationship, would you say? Does it feel fair? The most common response by a mile is both people will say, no. Like, oh, right, and who's an unfair on? Me. So they both say the same thing. So, okay. So, and why does that matter? Well, because it affects connection.
Yes.
It affects element number one, which is individual well-being.
Yeah.
And in itself, it's the sense of injustice, just affects the whole relationship greatly. So then we'll have to go into the fine print and look at, okay, in what way is it unfair, and in what way is it unjust, and then start working your way towards the particular after that.
The super nitty-gritty.
Yeah.
And then I guess also if two people say it's not fair, they're going to have such a negative opinion of their partner and the relationship.
Yeah.
And that's a hard ship to turn around sometimes, is getting people. Very. Yeah. So I think that's I like how these are all kind of, they're working together, all these parts that you're talking about.
They should be in a way, because if the model is self-contained, then with a small number of elements like this, they should all be really, really interrelated.
Yeah.
And part of my job will be to kind of show how they are, and how if one of the elements is unbalanced, then the other ones will be as well. Kind of like a domino effect.
Yeah.
Interconnected.
That makes sense. I liked also the point that you made about the term fairness. I think if you hear power and balance, people get a really, I don't know about you, but I hear when I talk about power in a relationship, people get really defensive. Yeah,
that's it. And we want to work around or past those defensive reactions somehow.
Yeah.
Get them on board. It's difficult, isn't it? The language is really important.
It is. I might have to pinch the word fairness off you if that's okay.
Yeah, I didn't make it up. Bland word. It's a bland word.
I don't do bland, Stuart.
I can at times.
The fourth point that you talk about is conflict management. Now, the Gottmans of the world, Terry Real, there's so many different ways of handling conflict. So can you kind of talk about what you find that works, doesn't work, and how you kind of, I guess, not settled, but what you're honing in on, I should say?
So that element, element number 4, conflict management, it's really all about process. It's all about how. So we have these, relationship difficulties, and how do we manage them? So number 4 is all about how. So conflict resolution is one way of describing it. Communication is another way of describing it. Cooperation, resolution, all these different words talking about process. So part of the whole concept of the model is always trying to choose the simplest language, the simplest explanation, and the simplest solution as well. So that's what I'm hoping to do anyway, to try to think of the simplest possible way of solving the problem. So I've got a couple that I draw on with conflict management, a couple of simple concepts, neither of which I invented. One is a bit more esoteric and arguably spiritual, which is Taoism.
Yes.
And the concept of yin yang and the concept of flow. So that concept is all about flow. And most people will say, yes, we want our communication or our conflict to flow better or be smoother. Nearly everyone will agree with that, except masochists. But so people will like the idea of it flowing more. Okay, so let's draw on that concept, the Taoist concept of yin yang. And what is that? That's the combination of hardness and softness. It's the combination of approaching someone and then receiving from the other. So we can do a little analysis of, okay, what do you like at both of those things? They're both important. Are you good at being assertive? Are you good at making proposals? Are you good at approaching the other? That's one skill. Those are yang skills. And yin skills are you good at being told what to do? Are you good at apologizing? Are you good at yielding and all those? Because both skills are important. So you could run a bit of an analysis on that. An even simpler model than that, I think, is just simple continuum where you look at like the assertiveness continuum. Yeah. At one end, we've got being extremely submissive or permissive at one end, or soft or avoidant. And at the other end of the continuum, we've got hard, authoritarian, aggressive, arguably abusive, violent. So these are the two extremes, poles.
Yeah.
And the idea is, okay, well, obviously both of those are destructive for both people. So we want to steer away from those two extremes. How can we, or how can I help them bring it right towards the center? Now, not perfectly in the middle, because you can't be perfect.
So I really like that it's bringing greater awareness to I guess what you're good at and what you're not good at, really.
That's true.
I think that's definitely. I really like how you put that is are you good at receiving and analyzing yourself if you're good at, and I think
absolutely,
especially when we're talking about couples who are both saying no, this relationship's not fair. People don't sit to think about if they're doing a good job at each point of the giving or receiving in terms of, and I think that's a really good takeaway for today is to think about who you are in the relationship.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've hit the nail on the head. I think certainly in my experience, the critical ingredient, like what's the critical factor in success in relationship counseling? My experience is absolutely self-knowledge. And from that self-knowledge, hopefully ownership. So if we can encourage each individual to take more responsibility for the state of the relationship, good things happen. But that's challenging, very challenging.
Yes,
for everyone, I think.
Yeah. I couldn't help to think about when you're talking about somebody who's very assertive and somebody who might be easily told what to do.
Yep.
Sometimes how people like that are very much attracted to one another. How they go together very well, but then they show up and still say that this relationship's not fair, and have that. What are your thoughts on being, I guess, attracted to the quality that you don't have, that kind of is well suited to your personality type, but then finding it frustrating? It's a funny concept to think about.
Yeah, because it seems to be a paradox.
Yeah,
doesn't it? I would start with, how does this matter? How is this a problem for you? If you are finding yourself losing your voice or being submissive or subservient or something like that, how is it affecting you? And then the solution should flow from there. And the opposite might be true as well. Like if you're finding yourself being aggressive or domineering, how is that a problem? How is that affecting the other person? And invite a kind of an exploration of whether it's adaptive or not.
Yeah, wow.
And so to your point, the concern there might be, well, why are you falling into that pattern? If you are falling into a particular pattern of subservience or whatever, why is that happening, and how does it matter? How does it affect you? But yeah, that's a tricky one.
Yeah. And I think it gets tricky too, with what you just said, is getting people to have that self-awareness. I'm just thinking about, clients I've worked with who potentially might sit in that aggressive space, who don't have the awareness to even understand while we're having a conversation how it affects the other, or to see that they are being aggressive.
Particularly in the room, like you're seeing it happening.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. So, it's, what you said, it's about really understanding the self, but I guess not everybody's always ready to.
Or capable. Well, how do you I think you've told me before about particularly aggressive people in the room in therapy. Like, how do you handle it? If you yourself are witnessing it and experiencing it.
Yeah. I think you just kind of call it out and you talk about what's acceptable. Some people might think it's acceptable to be screamed at, but my boundaries in my building, my rules is that's not how we treat other people.
So you'll model assertiveness.
Well, yeah, or if anybody was incredibly aggressive, I would just comment that that's not appropriate. That's not how we speak to each other in this room. It's like talking to my children. I've got to teach them people shouldn't yell at them and how they should and shouldn't. And here we are working with adults.
Yeah.
The last thing I wanted to ask you, which I thought was pretty important, was I liked how they all kind of flow together. But I think you mentioned that you're going to have a frequently asked question spot in the book.
Yeah, definitely.
I love that. I mean, that could probably be a book in itself.
Probably. Part 2.
Do you want to give us any sneak peeks into frequently asked questions that you get as a therapist?
I think what I will do for the purposes of the book, I'll probably neatly fit them into my model to make my model look good. So they'd probably come under those different categories. So let's go one at a time. So the first element is individual self-care management.
Yep.
So if I started with that one, it would be, how do I know that my partner's self-care or well-being is affecting the relationship?
Yeah.
Like how do I determine that? Or how do I, if I am concerned, like let's say a very common concern might be, extremely common concern might be, your partner is drinking too much, or some kind of drug misuse. So how do I get through to them? When I've tried all these different ways of trying to influence them to take better care of themselves or moderate or whatever, how can I make my partner aware of the impact it's having on the relationship? So bringing everything back to the relationship.
Yeah.
So that's a very, very difficult problem to solve. But that would certainly be a frequently asked question for element number 1.
I think a lot of people.
How to get through to them.
I think we could probably do a whole episode on that question.
Just that one alone.
Yeah. Because I think that is a burning question that a lot of people do have.
Yeah, it's super common.
Yeah. Oh, and even if it's not just drinking, though, how do I get through to my partner?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I think that's a really good question.
Yeah.
Might be book number 2.
Yeah. I mean, I think the whole idea of how do we get through to one another? How do we influence one another? How do we persuade one another? That's all in the domain of element number 4. The whole thing about reaching one another, getting through to one another. It's such a difficult thing to do. Everybody's defensive and everybody has ego issues. So it's a big topic.
That is a big topic. Well, I really look forward to you finishing this book.
Me too.
I look forward to going to the book launch. I'm inviting myself along.
Great.
All right. So if you had to do a moment of reflection, and what would you leave people with for today?
I would encourage everyone to not necessarily agree with my model, but ask themselves, if I had to apply the simplest explanation as to why my relationship is struggling or why we're having tension, if I had to put it in a one-liner or even a phrase or a sentence, if I had to do that, what would it be? And just sort of forcing the mind to think in the simplest possible terms is a really difficult thing to do, but a really, really important thing to do. And arguably, you will hit the nail on the head. And then that's something that could help prepare you for couples counselling maybe.
Yeah.
Or something that you might be able to bring to the other. So the whole idea of simplicity.
Fantastic.
Easier said than done.
Well, thank you for leaving us with that. And yeah, let us know when this book's out.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks for having me.
Cheers.